Next Thursday.
Okay, well, we are so excited to have the Dean of the McKay School here with us, Dr. Richard Osguthorpe, who is sharing some of his research with us, Moral Rewards of Teaching, as you can see on the screen. We're grateful for him and his time in joining us this afternoon. If you'll please join me in welcoming him to our seminar today.
I am, whoops, I better stand over here. Like there, I am excited to be here today in IP&T. I've got a long-standing connection to this department. It's familial, and it's a privilege to be here. I have to admit I'm a little bit at this point. I didn't get invited on Waffle Day, but I'm going to get over that. So
you're invited on Waffle Day.
Just kidding. Now remind me, Dr. McDonald told me this. What programs are we in? Are we all masters, all PhD, a little bit of both? Okay, all right, good. So I'm going to jump right in here. We're going to talk about transformative practice, the moral rewards of teaching. That's the presentation. I'm going to give you a little intro on who I am and what I'm all about. If you do come, as Rick mentioned, we're going to give some food to you and maybe some swag or whatever. I know they're coming up with something up there in the dean's office to express our appreciation to you as graduate students. That's kind of what we do on this campus. We provide food, right? Soup and bread and waffles. And I was telling Jason before that I lost weight over the holidays. And my wife, she said, I'm going to talk to the vice president. She said, this is getting out of control. You shouldn't lose weight over the holidays. You should lose weight. You should gain weight over the holidays. Because you're not on that campus and not eating every 5 minutes, you're losing weight over the holidays. And that's what being administrator on this campus provides for, is a lot of food. So we'll provide more food for you. But more seriously, it's an opportunity to say thank you. So I'll take that opportunity if you don't have a chance to get up there whenever we do that. I think it's the 6th or something like that. Say thank you. Thank you for being on our campus. Thank you for being here. Thank you for studying in our programs where we can bathe the content in the light and color of the restored gospel, where we can utilize a gospel methodology. I use that as to say thank you, but also as an introduction to my own work. I spent 25 years since leaving this campus thinking about the moral work of teaching. And it has done my heart good, and as well as my mind, to be back in this place, to be able to study it in a way that is different and unique to this setting. And it's given me the opportunity to think about it in ways that I couldn't think about it anywhere else but here. I hope that you're taking advantage of being at BYU for those same reasons. No matter what you're studying in terms of instructional psychology and technology, and you're all worried about your thesis, your dissertation, or your project. And I hope you're finding ways to connect that to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's the beauty of being at BYU. Now, really quickly, just by way of intro, that's my family up there. This one right here just got home off her mission last Thursday. And she's back in our home, and we love being together again. Sorry. This beautiful one is graduating from Timpview High School this year. The two boys there, this was taken before our daughter's mission. So picture them 6 inches taller, both of them. They really are much taller. Given our oldest, Olivia, just still can't quite adjust to them being so tall, but they are in 8th grade and 6th grade right now. And my wife, Gwen, she's from Modesto, California. I grew up here in this valley. My dad was on the faculty here, and we left 25 years ago. Oh, this is what I love doing. I love being on a river. I miss our rivers up in, we have rivers here. We're 45 minutes away in Idaho, where we lived, in Eagle, Idaho. And I love the water like that, but I love it even more when it's like that. So I started out here at BYU, did my undergrad in French teaching, taught over at Timpview High School, went off to graduate school and studied with Gary Fenstermacher and Virginia Richardson at the University of Michigan, and then ended up at Boise State in a faculty role, in an administrative role for the last 15 years, and then came here a couple of years ago, stepped into the dean role last July. Yeah. And here we are coming up at the end of year one in this role. And I bleed blue, all kinds of blue, but I am a Cougar through and through. It's just a part of me, and love being back here at BYU. Really quick, just because you're all in programs, and I'm going to present on this right here, this work that I've been doing recently. But I think it's helpful to know you kind of have you got your head in a lot of different places as a professor. A lot of mine's in administrative work right now. But in terms of my research, again, I'll talk about this, but I've got a project with Dr. Clark and Dr. Sudwigs in your department on teacher self-efficacy in the moral work of teaching. We're designing an instrument to help us measure teacher self-efficacy. And I think Dr. Sudwigs is going to send that final version to us. It's supposed to be there today or tomorrow. So then we'll talk about it and probably send it off for publication in the next couple of weeks as we finalize it. We're meeting next week on that one. That's a fun project. I'm really interested here on how we prepare teachers to engage in the moral work of teaching. What does that look like in our preparation and in professional development? It happens to be work that everyone embraces and loves, but I always talk about it as it feels like you're breaking down an open door, because everyone loves it, but no one wants to really actually engage in meaningful discourse about what we do to improve it. And so teachers actually have a lot of self-efficacy there, but we don't actually do much to study it or to prepare them for it, even though it's one of the primary reasons for why teachers choose a career in teaching. So studying an instrument, see if we can track that along over time to see what that looks like and how it ebbs and flows. And then we have another study. This is a colleague of mine up at Boise State. We've looked at teacher judgment accuracy of academic learning. And this is a simple thing. We just say, I look at it across my class and I try to make predictions on how well they're doing in math or reading or whatever the content might be. And as it turns out, if you're good at predicting how your students are doing, the teaching in your classroom is better and achievement goes up. And that shouldn't come as any surprise, right? If you actually know how your students are doing. But if you do that same, we did it with, started out with pre-service teachers. They happen to be no better than random at it. They just guessed. It's pretty tough skill. And so we're looking at that same type of measure on the teacher-student relationship and a measure of closeness and a measure of conflict. I'm working with a graduate student here at BYU as well. He's writing his thesis on it, on one aspect of it, and then we're looking at other pieces. We're looking specifically at the cues that the teachers use to make those predictions. We're actually looking at in terms of the relationship. Is it someone nodding their head and smiling? Oh, yes, we must have a close relationship. We must be connecting. So what are they looking at? Using as their cues to make those predictions in an effort to see if we can't improve that accuracy. So this is some of the work. I'm going to focus on this one up here. I'll jump right into it. If you've got questions about the other stuff, I'm happy to respond to anything. I have to say this too. I just loved waking up this morning early. And what was on my mind was this presentation. It did my heart good. That's what I got to think about this morning. I love to think about these types of projects and ideas. We're in the idea business, right? My mentor, my advisor in graduate school, his family was in the appliance business. They sold appliances at a furniture store and appliance store. And he decided not to go into that business. And his dad was like, "What are you thinking, Gary? Brother's doing this. This is going to be lucrative. This is what the family does. And you've got to be in the appliance selling business. You got to sell washing machines." And he said, "Dad, I'm going to sell something. It's not going to be washing machines. It's going to be ideas. I'm going to sell ideas." And so I loved waking up this morning and thinking about selling you an idea. I love ideas. I hope that you do too. I hope you're in a program. I know you've got to get your thesis or dissertation done, and Rick's on you for not getting your document to him last night, and it's due and whatever. I realize those are the pressure. But I hope that you just love thinking about the work that you're doing, and that when you wake up the morning, you got other things to worry about too. So do I. I love it when this stuff is on my mind and I get to just work through it. So I'll talk about that topic. And this, I've been thinking about this question for the better part of like 25 years. I used to say, boy, you have the program there, Osguthorpe. Let's get an answer to it and move on. It was actually the primary questions of the dissertation I wrote, whatever that was, 15, 20 years ago. But I've always thought, why do we want teachers to be good in a moral sense? Like, why do we need them to be good? And there are a whole bunch of reasons. I'm not going to go into all of them right now. I just want to posit this for you, that we want them, for the purpose of this paper, we want them to be good, of good moral character and disposition, because we want moral educators who can teach transformatively. I'm going to describe that, what I mean by teaching transformatively, and so that they can access what Dora Santoro calls the moral rewards of teaching. That this paper provides some additional reasons in terms of my own work for why we might want teachers good moral character and disposition in the classroom. So I'll get into each one of those. By transformative teaching, I'll contrast it with reproductive teaching. And you've probably heard about reproductive teaching, where we just look at what the system does and it just reproduces inequality, right? We just stick a bunch of students in and we send them out, and the system is reproductive in that sense. Part of the reason for it being reproductive is it discards the everyday languages of minoritized students. It sees students and families in terms of what they lack, in terms of, instead of what they really bring and add to the school and community life. It's a place of high teacher control, and it's curriculum that stories students' communities as inferior, and in that way it becomes reproductive of our of the inequality that we see throughout our the system. So that would be the contrast. By transformative, I'm going to describe it as something, and I should have mentioned this. Those three projects I put up there, the two that I mentioned in relation to self-efficacy and then teacher judgment accuracy are more data oriented. This one's more philosophically oriented, this project. We're just thinking about stuff. He said, well, how do you get away with that, Rich? You just think about things, you put them up. That's what some of us get to do. Yeah. I don't know if I'm very good at it, but I love doing it. And so this isn't empirically validated or anything like that. This is just thinking through things, and I'll base it on some of the, I'll talk about some of the philosophical theory that undergirds this as I go through it. So I'm going to talk about transformative teaching then as effective, meaningful, agentic, and moral. Now, if we want to call teaching anything like good, we're going to start with the fact it's going to have to be successful, right? It's going to be successful in achieving the outcomes of the learning outcomes that you've set out to achieve. But when we talk about it as meaningful, I'll say this: meaningful teaching. Well, let me go back up a little bit to draw out this point more. And this goes back to my advisor's work in a paper that was written in 2005 on, it's called On Quality Teaching. And in that, they make an argument that for something to be called quality teaching, it has to be both effective and good in a moral sense. So, and I'll use this is a bad example, but when I say good in a moral sense, it has to be both good in content and it has to be good in method, morally good. So if I was teaching someone, for example, how to steal a candy bar from the store, I could be effective. I could be really effective at doing that. I wouldn't call it quality teaching though, because the content of my teaching is not defensible in a moral sense. Teaching someone how to steal, not good. Therefore, not quality teaching. I'm going to call it effective. Well, they got out of there with a dozen candy bars. They did better than I thought they would. Right? I was effective. So it can be effective, but not good from a content perspective. It can also be good, but not good. It can also be effective, but not good from a methodological perspective. So the methods that I employ, if I found that, my goal is to help you understand transformative teaching, that I threatened you with physical harm to keep you on task during this seminar, it might be effective. You might sit up in your chair and, oh my gosh, he's got the stick out and here it comes. But we wouldn't call that quality teaching because it's not good. It's not defensible in moral terms. So those are these two here. Brian and I, the other professor that has worked on this, we've talked about this in terms of being meaningful as well, and agentic. Let me just talk a little bit about each of those. So if you think about transformative teaching with these elements is effective, meaningful, agentic, and moral. Effective teaching, that description of the practice, it's aligned with appropriate skills, techniques, all the things that you learn about in a teacher preparation program for helping students understand the content. It's going to lead to successful learning. And that's sometimes where we stop with teaching. I'm going to make sure you have the content knowledge that you need, the methodological skill that you need to employ that and to help students help get it from your head into someone else's. And we'll judge the effectiveness by whether or not they can get all the answers right on their standardized test at the end of the semester. But I also want to talk about it in terms of being meaningful, that it's connected to the everyday. This is to make it transformative so that it's not reproductive. It also then, if it's going to be transformative, maybe beyond quality, it also needs to be connected to the everyday lived experiences and identities of minoritized students. In this way, as we connect it to their everyday lived experience, it affords them relevant participation in the content, or the skill, or whatever they're learning. And it promotes a sense of shared accomplishment. And that's important. I'll get to that a little bit later on. I talk about it, and Brian and I, we disagree on this. I think it needs to be agentic as well. I think agentic is separate from some of these others. And I just heuristically, I think it's important to draw out this way. But that practice needs to be derived from teacher reflection and decision-making. Yeah, Rick.
So I think I know the answer, but just to clarify, so do you mean teacher agency here or
Yes.
teaching in a way that promotes like student agency and learning?
Teacher agency, yeah.
So that they can control their pedagogy.
Yeah, so if the district is mandating the curriculum, right, saying, hey, you've got to, for it to be transformative, I think it needs to be agentic because I want this as a result. I want it to be purposeful. I want to have real meaning and purpose in my own pedagogy. And I think that's the only way to bring about and to if it's going to be transformed, it's going to have to last. That's the durable change part. It's not going to, if you've been told to do something, how many of you are teachers? And we've got teachers out there, yeah. You're told to do something by the district office, right? And you don't believe in it, and it's the new curriculum, the state's just mandating it. Yeesh, right? But if it comes from your own reflection, decision-making, it's got a chance to last, and it's got a chance to be purposeful in the classroom. And then I've talked about the moral. It has to be defended in relation to what's virtuous, equitable. I use those words. Yeah, Charles.
So with the agentic, are you talking about both content and methodology, or are you mostly focusing on methodology for that?
Both, but probably yes to both of those. Yeah, in terms of the method. That's where I think we're going to have some of the contents. There's going to be a given in any, but it's going to be more emphasis on the methods and how that's taught. It might be a new reading program. Right? It might not be. The teacher's not going to be saying, "Well, I don't believe in teaching reading," but it'll be mostly about the methodology. And then moral, I use those words: virtuous, equitable, caring. I'm going to talk about this framework in just a minute that kind of highlights why I chose those. But I come at this from a kind of a virtue ethics perspective, Aristotelian philosophy that allows. I choose it not because I think it's necessarily better than one philosophy or another. It's the language that most teachers, in my experience, speak most readily. They can talk about virtues. They have more difficulty talking about it from a Kantian perspective or a Humean perspective. And we could probably articulate it in those words as well, but this is virtue language is one, especially here. It's been so fantastic for me. It takes about somewhere between 13 and 15 minutes for students to adopt the moral language that so many of my colleagues say it's missing in teacher education classrooms, that moral language. Again, because of our understanding of religious upbringing that a lot of our students share, it's somewhere between 13 and 15 minutes that they just, all right, I know how to talk virtues. So I use that, but this is about principled practice. And I'm going to talk about it in terms of also the effectual retention, retaining teachers, keeping them in the classroom. And that's the part I'm going to end on today. But that's a notion, at least, again, I don't put this out there as this is just the way I'm thinking. We'll see if somebody publishes it. All right, so then we ask a question, so what's the role of teacher education in supporting conformative teaching? Okay, here, if I got one up, there we are, okay. All right, I'm going to hum through a couple of these, all right? The role of teacher education, a lot of times for me, is going to focus on dispositions. We talk about preparing teachers with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And I like to talk about dispositions in this way. And you can see some of those that I cite there that Brian cites. This is Brian's definition up top. The thoughts, beliefs, and actions piece, that most people resonate with that when we think about dispositions. The willingness part is important to me. Dispositions, if you think about it from a virtues perspective, and I'll try to touch on this a little bit later as well. They have to be virtues of the will, things that we can change, things that we can develop, things that we choose to do, not just personality traits that come with who we are. And then this one's really important. I'm going to touch on it really quick. I like to talk about dispositions, the way that we prepare our teachers as adverbial to practice. They modify practice in these ways. I talk about it in relation to teaching morally. Say teaching, we can teach morality, or I can teach someone what's the difference between right and wrong. I'm teaching morally. These are the dispositions, or those virtues that are modifying my practice, so that I'm not teaching someone to be respectful. I'm respectfully attending to controversial matters in the curriculum. I'm not necessarily just teaching someone to be persistent. That would be teaching morality. Teaching morally is to, if I've got that virtue or that character trait or that disposition, and I'm allowing that to modify my practice so that I persistently help a struggling student, or fairly, that's what I'm doing there. Grade student work, equitably allocate time, and compassionately provide extra instruction. So you go on and on and on down a list, right? I just put these up there as examples. But this becomes the work of teacher education to help our teacher candidates develop and take who they are dispositionally, and help those dispositions to modify their teaching. I'm not just trying to help my teacher candidates become persistent and fair and respectful and equitable. I need them to learn what it means to apply those dispositions, those virtues, those character traits to what it means to teach in a classroom. And you can do that along a continuum of virtue there. So this is the framework we proposed. And this you see the good, equitable, and caring there that I talked about before in terms of being moral. Well, these are the primary dispositional virtues of moral educators. This comes out of the work of Hugh Socket. Again, he's a virtue ethics person as well, philosopher. We talk about virtue from a perspective of virtues of character, that's good, intellect, that's equitable, and care. And let me just, I'll bring the slide here. If you think about those dispositions of character, intellect, and care, are good, equitable, and caring, is the way I like to talk about it when I describe a teacher. These would be dispositions and virtues. The virtues associated with each of these primary categories would be things like self-awareness, trustworthiness, persistence, responsibility. Those are virtues of character. that's good. That's virtues of intellect from a Aristotelian perspective again, fairness and open-mindedness. And I've just selected some here that seem to have, again, this is not an exhaustive list, we could come up with more. They just seem to have the most applicability to classroom teaching for me. The strongest connection to modifying actual practice. And we could come up with others again. I'm not saying that these are the end all be all list, but those of care would be kindness, sensitivity, empathy, and compassion. And then we've been talking about it recently, and not just, you see the primary dispositions up there, good, equitable, caring, but some intersecting dispositions that draw on the virtues of care, for example, and equitable, and talk about a disposition of being advocatory, or a disposition of being meek that draws on the virtues of care and the virtues of character, or being good. And you can see social. So got those three up there as well. Again, not exhaustive. This isn't, it's just, we talked about some that when we're talking about a transformative, talking about transformative practice and pushing back against reproductive teaching, what might some of those dispositions be that are going to have really strong application to practice that might serve us well in terms of preparing teachers that can engage in something that's transformative and not reproductive. All right. I mentioned Doris Santoro earlier. She makes this distinction between, I'm going to talk about what this looks like in teacher education now, this framework. She makes this distinction between teacher burnout and teacher demoralization. And the work that she's done suggests that, you know what, teachers, we talk about, those that leave the profession a lot, and they were burned out. They left because they just had it, right? And she suggests, I think quite convincingly, that most that she talked with, she started to she interviewed teachers, started to realize, wait a second, they're not burned out in the typical sense, like they just don't have the capacity to do this work anymore, or they're just kind of flatlined. Actually are really highly skilled, fantastic, outstanding teachers, but they're no longer engaged in work where they can access, as she calls them, moral rewards of teaching. All the reasons that got them into the profession in the first place, they don't have access to those rewards, to those motivations have left. Everything is dictated by a standardized test or a certain curriculum they have to teach. They don't have any teacher agency. They don't have an opportunity to make it meaningful for students. All they're focused on is whether or not they can be effective and whether or not they can get the test scores. And so it's not only not meaningful and agentic, but most importantly, the reason they leave is because it's now demoralized. They don't have access to that moral part. They're not able to engage in work that they think is actually defensible on moral grounds. Been asked to read the red portion while their students read the blue portion and test them on it. And they find that morally indefensible. So she puts that term that they're actually demoralized. Great book on that. Just a couple years ago, she's had some earlier articles as well. But I mentioned the moral rewards of teaching. I think this is the task of teacher education. And I think this is what transformative teaching allows us to do, is to give teachers access to these moral rewards. When teaching is not only effective, but it's also meaningful, agentic, and moral. Teachers have the opportunity to access these types of what I'll call rewards. And this is primarily my list, but increased self-efficacy and fulfillment, enhancement of common cause, noble purpose, genuine satisfaction with what you're doing on a daily basis. You go home and you say, hey, it was a good day. It was good work I was engaged in. You get authentic student participation, and then a meaningful connection with students. These are the moral rewards. I'm going to reconnect to these as well. But what I want to do first is make an argument that the moral rewards of teaching, these are goods that are internal to the practice of transformative teaching. And this, so when that might be a little hard to make sense of that slide there, but those rewards I just spoke about. So those are goods that are internal to a practice. And this practice in this case is going to be transformative teaching, or just teaching, period. And then this argument is based on Alistair McIntyre's arguments in After Virtue from coming up on 50 years ago, right? So McIntyre says this. He says, first of all, teaching is a practice. You can see his definition there of what a practice is. And teaching falls into this category of a practice. Look at that real quick. I'll point out there, you see the complex form of socially established cooperative activity through which goods internal to that form of activity are realized in the course of trying to achieve those standards of excellence. So he's making a case there that there are goods internal to practices, and that teaching is a practice in this sense. Second claim here from McIntyre, there are external internal goods related to practices. For teaching, you can think about some of the external goods. They might come in the form of merit pay for successful or effective teaching. Some type of accolade you get as a teacher. There are external goods. The internal goods are the ones moral rewards. Three, this is the bigger claim. Yeah.
Is the term goods synonymous to rewards? Is that what teacher feels reward, like what's rewarding to them, or?
Yes.
Is there something?
We could say yes to that for the purpose of our discussion. Yeah, that I can make them synonymous for the most part. That's how I'm going to describe them as moral rewards that are accessible, but they're just and maybe this highlights it a little bit better. That this is McIntyre. Look, if you want to access those goods, you have to exercise virtue. You can't access those types of goods unless you exercise virtue. And virtue is an acquired human quality, the possession and exercise of which tends to enable us to achieve those goods, those rewards, which are internal to practices, and the lack of which effectively prevents us from achieving any such goods or rewards that I described at least. So if you think about that, that's the most important claim I think I'm going to make right here. And
Question
yes,
back there with that term goods, because it's not settling with me very well. Because I think one of the things as educators, we want to not necessarily earn a reward or that merit pay or whatever that is. We want to be validated as educators rather than looked on as pawns in a game. And so I think that's one of the reasons that there's such a demoralization of us. When we are spoken about in the press, when we are talked about by administrators, when the legislature comes out with some very punitive things, second guessing our methodologies or our curriculum choices, we feel that demoralization because we are not being validated rather than receiving an award. So I guess that's where I'm having a problem with the word goods and that idea of virtue in the same sentence type of thing.
yeah. Well, if I understand your consternation, let me go back to the list of moral rewards. These are the goods that, so there are goods that are internal to practices. They could be external or internal, right? The external ones are the ones you're talking about that drive you crazy. You don't have any That's not what motivates teachers to get into the profession. It doesn't motivate them when the legislature says, hey, we're going to actually give you a $1,273 raise to do something, right? That's not, those are external rewards. They might come. I'm not positioning those as the rewards that come from being a moral educator. I'm positioning these rewards that are internal to the practice. The only way the argument I'm making is the only way you gain access to these is through the exercise of virtue. You can gain access to the other ones without the exercise of virtue. You can go through the motions, you can show up and right. But if you want to gain access, so when you talk about, well, you mentioned something that did motivate you. Now I'm blanking on what it was. That you want.
I want to be validated. I don't.
Validated it. Yeah, this, you want to have a sense of noble, of common cause, right? We're all in this together. We're doing this. We got to, my teacher team here in school A, we are working on something together. We're working with our students. We're all in this. I don't care what the legislature says. We've figured something out in our professional learning community here that's really valuable. We agentically have opted into this in a way that it's really helping our students, and it's defensively from a moral standpoint. I know this is good, and I'm connecting it to the everyday lived experience of my students, not what some curriculum is telling me from the district. And so this is really valuable. I'm exercising virtues that give me access to these types of rewards. So the goods, those are the goods. Those are the rewards that I think that captures some. These are the things that, and we could come up with a longer list. This is just this piece in terms of increased self. It has nothing. These are the internal ones that are only available to you through the exercise of virtue. And that's the primary argument I'm making. That's why it's incumbent upon us as teacher educators to help our teacher candidates develop not only those virtues, but connect those virtues, those dispositions to their practice in a way that allows them to gain access to these types of, because without access to these, they get demoralized. And because they're not driven by the external rewards that are a part of any practice. Did that help at all?
Well, that clarifies what goods are.
Okay. Well, these next two slides really are just trying to point out through this a little bit more quickly, but this makes the point that you think about just providing some instructional scaffolds to students, and adequate response time, rephrasing questions, timely hints and cues, and in a technical sense, that practice really suggests that in a technical sense. In a moral sense, you're going to have to do something more than that. And this requires the exercise of virtue. In the technical sense, we can go through those motions, and it does not require virtue. Similarly, when you think about those goods, that's what we just talked about. Maybe this clarifies it a little bit more. We might get an increase in student test scores. That doesn't drive a lot of teachers, in my experience. Unless they really love the test that you're administering. Merit pay, for example, that doesn't drive most, but more from a moral sense, in that instructional scaffolds example, that's what's available to you if you exercise the virtues connected with practice. Now, I don't know if we're going to have time for this. We end at what? If we end at 12:50 or 1 o'clock. Well, I've got a couple of scenarios. We're not going to have time to go through. One's Josh, one's Samantha. This is what, as I've presented elsewhere, I think this helps illustrate what it means to the importance of developing the dispositions or virtues that allow you to gain access to those moral rewards. And I think what I'll do is end really quick and see if there are additional questions and maybe answer some of them that way. So I'll end with this. So why we want teachers of good moral character and disposition. I want them to be able to be in that moral educator space. I want them to be in a place where they are able to not just be effective, but engaged in practice that is meaningful. It's connected to the everyday lived experience of students. It's agentic, meaning that they weren't being told by some person that's not an expert in what they do, not having to have their curriculum reviewed by someone that doesn't know or has never been in a classroom. But it's agentic, and then it's also moral. It's defensible moral grounds in terms of what it means to be good and caring. And the claim that I'm making today, based on McIntyre's work and Santoro's work, is if you can engage in that kind of practice, you have access to those moral rewards of teaching that we described, those goods that are internal to practice. And so it becomes practice that's not only effective, but it gives access to those things that drive all of the students that I've worked with in teacher education to choose a career in teaching in the first place. And it was, I've asked that question over 25 years. No one has ever said, I'm choosing this career because I am really excited about raising test scores. What's our Utah test now? Rise? What are we calling it? Yeah.
We call it rage. Sage and rise together.
Rise.
And so, and no one has ever said it's about the pay. No one's ever said it's about opportunity to climb a career ladder. They talk about reasons that are connected to the moral work of teaching. They want to make a difference in this world. They want to connect with students in meaningful ways, be role models. They want to do all kinds of good work. And it's only through the exercise of virtue that you can exercise goods. That's the philosophical argument. I could have students with the same effective outcome. Right? I could go in and show up in my classroom, and I could throw the worksheet out there. The students could work on it themselves together. One student could help another. I could be reading the newspaper. Test scores could go up. Right? I've achieved my learning outcome, but I have no access to those moral rewards because I didn't exercise any virtue. I didn't engage in my practice in a way that gave me, and that's the virtue theory argument. If I want to gain access to those goods that are internal to practice, I've got to exercise the virtue. Without it, there's nothing there for me. And I fear that that's too often the case in education, that we leave ourselves empty-handed because we don't prepare teachers to be able to engage in that. And it's not just a teacher, and I haven't talked about this, it's not just a teacher education issue, it's a system issue. We need to change things in the system that allow teachers to engage in their practice in those meaningful, agentic, and moral ways. And I'll leave it. I got questions, so let's answer questions through the last year. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
I was just kind of building off of that. I was going to ask, in terms of presenting this philosophy outside of a university setting where you're educating new teachers, have you exposed like teachers who are maybe more seasoned or who have worked longer? Have you talked with groups of teachers about this and seen positive reactions to it, or feelings like this is a possibility for a change, or like at a school level, or I guess on the more systemic level, have you received any feedback on this type of thinking?
I mean, yes and no, not in any formalized way in terms of like being engaged in full-fledged professional development with teachers, but I have plenty of conversations along those lines. And also in some other states and working with groups where I've been asked to present some of this work. What the teachers like most is the part I didn't give you today, was the scenarios. They like to look at the scenarios. Okay, now I can see that framework in play. I can see what it looks like to exercise virtue for Josh and Samantha. I think that's the best response I've received in terms of what it might look like. From a systems perspective, my experience has been in Idaho. I served in the same role at Boise State University. And the response there is very mixed because it's always effectiveness driven, right? That is the coin realm in any state legislature. But when we talk about a teacher retention problem and a teacher shortage, I think this is a big part of the answer to that type of issue because of the type of person that we attract into the profession who wants access to these types of rewards, because that's why, or these goods internal to the practice, because that's what drove them into the practice in the first place. And when teachers have access to this, when they can come home from the day and say, yeah, that was a good day. I helped, she got it. And it took all kinds of persistence and grit and from on my part, but it worked and it happened and it was exhausting. But I'm ready to go back again tomorrow. That's what connects the most, I think. Royce? Yeah.
Yeah, so just on the question of how do we build systems that not only allow for moral rewards of teaching, but actually encourage accessing moral rewards of teaching. I think in our country in particular, but in many parts of the world as well, you see kind of an inverse relationship between our perceptions of specific careers and their moral rewards associated with that career and the actual financial benefits of that career. So it's not just teaching in our society, but nursing is similar, social work is similar. We view people in those professions as having high moral rewards, but we kind of, it seems like we almost use it as an excuse not to compensate them, right? And you're not here for the money, so we're not going to give you the money. So could you talk to us a little about how we can build a system that allows for accessing those moral rewards, but also like actually encourages people to come into the system and not just requiring them to, go eat cake while they enjoy themselves with their moral rewards?
Yeah. I don't know if I've got a good answer to that, Royce. It's a great question. I don't know if I've got a good answer because my answer in legislative circles has always been pay them more money. Let's start there. And then we can start talking about systemic changes that we need to make. But I don't want to talk about any additional program or whatever until we raise pay. You were in Idaho with me. It was abysmal there. And the conversation was even more abysmal when it came to trying to, I love being a private institution, by the way, where I can say that now. That's for you, electronic world out there. But we have to start there. It's really hard to make the case for addressing this in a really meaningful way in terms of the moral work of teaching and connecting our teachers and profession to that when it's done on the assumption that it doesn't matter what you get paid, you're in a helping profession, and since you didn't sign up to get paid a lot, we'll just choose not to pay. I don't know how to overcome that hurdle and do anything systemically that would make a difference until we cross that bridge. I've done a little bit better job trying to move the needle there. Even some of those efforts I think have fallen short over the past few years. I've been disappointed that some of those entities across the state, some of those larger groups that convene to make that happen, haven't kept the pressure on. I think it needs to. I don't want to make it all about that, but I have a really hard time talking about what we can do in the system without addressing that first step.
Okay, we're gonna have to stop the conversation here, but let's thank Dean Osguthorpe for his time. He is close by, so. you can have-
Yeah, always open to conversations and I love thinking about this. If you're coming up to my office,